This interview is part of the James J. Blanchard Living Library of Michigan Political History.
We're talking today with Michigan Senator, United States Senator Carl Levin. He has served in the U.S. Senate since January of 1979. Senator, you were born in 1934. If we lived in Detroit in the 30s, 40s, 50s, and knew you, would we be surprised that today you're the longest-serving senator in Michigan's history?
Well, my mother probably wouldn't be surprised.
She would be surprised.
She would not be surprised.
It would not be?
Probably not, because she would be probably supportive and think that her kids could do anything that they set their mind to. But and my friends probably would not be surprised, because I was somewhat active, like in student government in high school, that kind of thing. So as kids, they wouldn't be surprised, because at my dinner table, my father and mother were always talking politics. They were strong New Dealers, supporters of FDR. So I would say probably they would, my friends, small circle, family probably would not be surprised that I ended up doing something in public service or government. I would have been surprised, however. Yeah, I never really planned on running for office. I was active in my brother's campaigns, which he won for the state senate in the 60s. And I was, of course, active in his campaigns, which he lost for governor in the 70s. But by the 70s, I was also on local government in Detroit City Council myself. So I always assumed my brother would be the one who would run for office. I would do something perhaps in government. I was an assistant attorney general in the 60s. I was general counsel for the Michigan Civil Rights Commission. That's
when the Michigan Civil Rights Commission was founded following the '63 Constitution. You became, what, first general counsel?
It's first general counsel in '64, and then I did that for 3 years, argued some of its early cases, as a matter of fact.
What were those? Were they key cases?
They were.
Do you remember?
They were. We had, I'd say, 3 key cases that I argued. The first was against the mayor of Dearborn, Orville Hubbard, a very famous mayor. He was a racist and kind of made no bones about keeping African Americans out of Dearborn. Had a bulletin board which humiliated any African American who might have walked into the city hall, where his bulletin board was right in the lobby, showing African Americans in any negative light he could find them. If there was an African American who had committed a crime and there was a picture of him in the paper, that would be on the bulletin board. It was anything negative about it.
This was in City Hall?
In City Hall in Dearborn. So we took him on. The Michigan Civil Rights Commission took him on first. It was our first cause. And the problem is that it was unclear as to whether we had jurisdiction. So we had to prove our jurisdiction, and we did it first with the commission after a very public hearing, issuing an order, which was the easy part, because the commission knew it was going to order him to take that bulletin board down. But then we had to go to court and try to enforce that order. And we ended up with a settlement, actually, where his lawyer, who ended up being a federal judge, advised him he should take down the bulletin board, acknowledge the jurisdiction of the Civil Rights Commission over local government because of the Equal Protection Clause in the Michigan Constitution. And it was a terrific victory. His lawyer was a wonderful guy. His name was Guy, as a matter of fact, Ralph Guy. And I think he became a federal judge.
Federal judge,
yeah.
Right.
And I think he understood that from Dearborn's perspective that they really needed to change their image, and of course they did. It's a very different city. But then we took on the much more complicated issue of housing jurisdiction for the Civil Rights Commission. And that one was, that went to the Michigan Supreme Court, because there it was a really, not a close legal question, although it was a divided opinion, but it was a very contested legal question as to whether or not the Michigan Civil Rights Commission had jurisdiction over housing discrimination in private sales by real estate people. And we
so not just public.
It wasn't public housing. This was
private transaction.
It was, and it was a major builder, Pulte, who's one of the biggest builders in the country, who actually claimed they had the right to discriminate. That because the Michigan Constitution was not explicit. It simply, in the Michigan Constitution, said that the Civil Rights Commission had the authority to enforce civil rights guaranteed by law. The question is, was there a law protecting against discrimination in housing? There was no statute.
Right.
So we had to prove a law other than statutory law. There's a public accommodations law, for instance, and this was a real estate office. That was the grounds that I wanted to fight on, because I thought there was at least a statute that we could argue. But the co-chairs of the commission, Judge Keith and Judge Fikens, and the other members of the commission wanted to argue a broader issue, that there is inherent in law, in civil rights law, from various sources, a right to non-discrimination in housing. And it had been mentioned it's not in a statute, it wasn't in a statute, but it had been mentioned in some of the proceedings at the Civil Rights, at the convention, not civil rights, at the Michigan Constitutional Convention in 1963, I believe. So it had been mentioned, and it was in sort of not in the text of the Constitution, but in the description of the text in the Constitution. So we argued the broad one, and we won, actually, on the broad one. Even though as a lawyer, I thought it'd be safer to argue the narrower one, the public accommodations statute. We won on the broad one and the narrow one, actually, both in the Michigan Supreme Court.
Okay. So you were in the midst of some interesting stuff at that point. I want to come back to that at that period, and go on into Detroit. But let me jump backwards a minute. You said your mother wouldn't have been surprised at your political interest and activity. Does that suggest your father might have been, or was not?
No. My father would have probably urged us to do it, because he was very much involved in government, both as a lawyer, but also he was on the Michigan Corrections Commission, which is the Citizens Commission, which oversees our prisons. That's a volunteer job, and he was very, very interested in prisoners. And he was also interested in migrant workers, as a matter of fact. He wanted to try to improve the conditions for migrant workers. He spoke Spanish and represented Honduras, believe it or not, in Michigan. He was the honorary consul, that means the unpaid consul for the country of Honduras in Michigan.
The Levin family is a well-known name in Michigan politics, has a rich political history in Michigan. Your brother, cousins, uncles, all have held office of one kind or another, or been involved in the political process.
My dad, my uncle, who was a federal judge, really believed in public service. They really believed that we could improve lives of average people, and as lawyers even. They helped bring a lot of immigrants to this country. They never charged for immigration work, as a matter of fact. They made their livelihood as lawyers after they were able to bring someone to the country. Then if that person went into business, usually that person would hire them as the lawyers. But bringing the immigration cases themselves, the litigation or whatever it was, they never charged people for. Of course, their parents were immigrants, and they felt pretty keenly.
When did your family immigrate?
Both my parents were born in the United States. So my grandparents were born in Europe. They came here probably around the 1890s. I'd say all four of the grandparents would have come around the 1890s with their, I don't know if they were with their parents, in some case with their parents, maybe not. But the grandparents would have come here probably as young kids in the 1990s? In the 1890s or 1880s.